Imagine possessing wealth so vast that you could buy entire islands, yet feeling so profoundly impoverished in human connection that you doubt the reality of kindness itself. We live in a world obsessed with accumulation, where a person's worth is often measured by their bank balance. But what happens when you strip away the designer suits, the private jets, and the black credit cards? What remains beneath the veneer of billions? Today, we are diving into a fascinating, fictionalized documentary account inspired by real-world social experiments. We follow an American titan of industry who, plagued by cynicism, decided to vanish into the chaotic heart of Manila, Philippines, with nothing but the rags on his back. He was looking for proof that humanity still existed. What he found changed everything, and the very first person to offer him a hand was the last person anyone would expect. Before we begin this incredible journey, drop a comment down below and let us know where in the world you are watching from today. We love seeing how global this community is. Now, let's step into the streets of Manila. Arthur Pendelton was not just rich, he was changed the skyline of a city rich. At 42, he was the architect of a global logistics empire that moved everything from microchips to medical equipment across oceans in mere hours. He lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park that cost more than most small towns' annual budgets, and he traveled exclusively by private convoy or jet. Yet, sitting in his minimalist, glass-walled office 70 stories up, Arthur felt a profound, aching hollowness. His interactions were transactional. People didn't see Arthur. They saw a walking ATM, an opportunity, or a stepping stone. He had begun to suspect that altruism was a myth, a comforting lie poor people told themselves. The cynicism was eating him alive. He needed to know if anyone would help a human being simply because they were human, with zero expectation of a reward. He decided on a radical experiment. He would disappear. He chose the Philippines, a place where extreme wealth and extreme poverty exist cheek by jowl, and he decided to go undercover in the densest part of Manila. The preparation for his descent into poverty was meticulous and bizarrely expensive. Arthur hired theatrical makeup artists to advise him on how to look authentically destitute without seeming like he was wearing a costume. He stopped shaving for 2 weeks and let his expensive haircut grow out ragged. He exchanged his Italian silk suits for grease-stained cargo shorts and a t-shirt that looked like it had survived a war. The hardest part was the psychological preparation. He had to learn to shrink, to avoid eye contact, to adopt the posture of someone the world had beaten down. He left his smartphones, his platinum cards, and even his passport in a secure hotel safe in Makati, the business district. With only a few hundred pesos crumpled in his pocket, the equivalent of about $5 American, he took a regular taxi away from the gleaming skyscrapers and high-end malls. He directed the driver toward Tonda, one of the most densely populated and impoverished districts in the world. The air changed instantly, growing heavy with the humidity of the tropics and the exhaust of thousands of jeepneys. Stepping out of the taxi felt like stepping onto another planet. The sensory assault was immediate and overwhelming. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on him, instantly soaking his ragged shirt in sweat. The noise was a chaotic symphony of roaring engines, blaring horns, vendors shouting their wares, and thousands of conversations happening all at once. Arthur, a man used to sterile boardrooms and soundproof limousines, felt an immediate spike of adrenaline bordering on panic. He was invisible in the worst possible way. People didn't look at him. They looked through him. He was just another obstacle on the crowded sidewalk, another piece of flotsam in the endless stream of humanity struggling to survive the day. His initial plan to just walk around and observe quickly crumbled under the reality of his situation. Within 2 hours, the novelty of the experiment had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing thirst and the horrifying realization that he had absolutely no idea how to exist in this environment. He was a master of global logistics, yet he couldn't figure out where to safely get a drink of water. By mid-afternoon, the romanticized notion of the noble poor that Arthur had subconsciously harbored was completely shattered. Poverty, he realized, wasn't noble. It was exhausting, terrifying, and incredibly boring all at once. Most of his energy was spent just trying to find a patch of shade to escape the blistering equatorial sun. He tried to sit near a small convenience store, hoping the air conditioning spilling from the doorway would offer some relief. But an armed security guard immediately shooed him away with a sharp gesture and a harsh word in Tagalog he didn't understand. The rejection stung more than he expected. In his real life, doors opened for him automatically. Here, they were slammed in his face because of how he looked. He walked for miles, his expensive loafers, which he had distressed with sandpaper, but were still fundamentally ill-suited for walking on broken pavement, blistering his feet. He saw immense suffering. Mothers bathing infants in buckets on the sidewalk, elderly men pulling carts heavier than cars, and children, far too many children, with eyes too old for their faces. As evening approached, a deep, primal hunger set in. Arthur hadn't eaten since a light breakfast at his five-star hotel, and the $5 in his pocket felt incredibly inadequate. He approached a street food vendor selling fried chicken intestines on skewers. The smell was enticing in his starved state, but when he fumbled with his coins, looking confused about the pricing, the vendor grew impatient and turned to other, faster customers. Arthur retreated, embarrassed by his own incompetence. He eventually bought a small, slightly stale sweet bun from a bakery for a few pesos, eating it quickly on a street corner while eyeing his surroundings nervously. The night brought a different energy to the city. The shadows deepened, and the sense of danger became palpable. He realized he had nowhere to sleep. He ended up curling up on a piece of flattened cardboard beneath an overpass, clutching his remaining coins. The concrete was hard and cold, the noise of the traffic overhead was deafening, and the fear of being robbed or attacked kept him awake most of the night. This was his first night of freedom from his wealth, and it was pure misery. The second day was worse than the first. Exhausted, grimy, and deeply discouraged, Arthur's cynical worldview began to feel justified. He sat near the famous Quiapo church, a hub of intense activity and devotion, watching thousands of people stream in and out. He decided to test his hypothesis actively. He sat on the curb, put his head in his hands, and adopted the posture of someone in utter despair, which wasn't much of an acting stretch at that point. He let out small, audible groans of distress. Hundreds of people walked past him. Businessmen in barongs hurried to meetings, students in uniforms laughed with friends, and pious grandmothers clutching rosaries stepped around him. No one stopped. A few cast glances of mild pity, but most practiced the urban survival skill of deliberate ignorance. To acknowledge his suffering would be to invite an obligation they couldn't afford. Arthur felt a bitter vindication settle in his gut. See, he thought to himself, without money you are nothing. Kindness is a transaction, and I have nothing to trade. He remained on that curb for 4 hours, the sun beating down on his neck, his hope dwindling with every passing pedestrian who ignored him. He was seriously considering abandoning the experiment, walking to the nearest upscale hotel, and demanding they call his security team to extract him from this nightmare. He was thirsty, dizzy from the heat, and his resolve was broken. Just as he was about to stand up and give up on humanity, a shadow fell over him. He didn't look up immediately, expecting it to be a police officer telling him to move along, or worse, a local tough guy looking to shake him down for his last few pesos. He braced himself for a confrontation, his muscles tensing. Instead, a small, weathered hand gently entered his field of vision. The hand was gnarled, the skin deeply lined and darkened by decades of sun exposure, the fingernails cracked and stained with soil. The hand was holding out a half-empty plastic bottle of water. Arthur slowly looked up, tracing the arm back to its owner. Standing before him was an elderly Filipino woman, perhaps in her late 60s or early 70s, though the harshness of her life made her age impossible to guess accurately. She was incredibly slight, perhaps 4 feet 10 inches tall, and hunched over from years of hard labor. Her clothes were mismatched rags, faded and patched together with different fabrics. On her arm, she carried a woven basket filled with garlands of sampaguita, the fragrant national flower of the Philippines, which street vendors sell for mere pennies. Her face was a map of deep wrinkles, but her eyes, framed by cataracts, held an expression that Arthur couldn't immediately place. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. She didn't speak English, but she gestured emphatically with the water bottle, urging him to take it. Arthur hesitated. He knew the rule about not drinking tap water, but his thirst was agonizing. He took the bottle, his hands shaking slightly, and nodded his thanks. She didn't leave after giving him the water. Instead, she slowly lowered herself onto the curb beside him, placing her basket of flowers carefully on her lap. She pulled a small, oil-stained paper bag from the pocket of her tattered skirt. Inside were 2 pieces of pandesal, a small, common Filipino bread roll. She took one, broke it in half, and offered the larger half to Arthur. He stared at the bread. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this woman had likely not eaten a proper meal that day. Selling those flowers might net her $2 or $3 on a good day, barely enough to survive. Yet here she was, sharing her meager rations with a complete stranger, a large, dirty foreigner who was twice her size and could offer her nothing in return. The cynicism that had armored Arthur's heart for decades developed a hairline fracture. He took the bread, mumbling a salamat. Thank you, one of the few words he had learned. They sat in silence for a while, eating the dry bread amidst the chaos of Quiapo. Eventually, she pointed to herself and said, Lola Rosa. Grandma Rosa. Arthur pointed to himself and lied, Arturo. She nodded, accepting this piece of information. Through a combination of gestures and broken phrases, she communicated to him. She asked where he was from. He gestured vaguely America, and feigned a story of losing everything. She didn't ask for details, she just nodded with a profound, sad understanding, as if the story of loss was the most common thing in the world. She pointed to her basket and then to the sky, indicating she had been working since before dawn. She then pointed to 3 fingers, then made a gesture of small children. Grandchildren, Arthur realized. She was supporting 3 children on the income of these tiny flowers. The gravity of her generosity hit him like a physical blow. This woman, Lola Rosa, was infinitely poorer than he had ever imagined being, yet she was the only one who had stopped. The billionaire and the flower vendor spent the next 2 hours together on that curb. Arthur, the man whose time was billed at thousands of dollars an hour, sat mesmerized by this woman who had nothing. She didn't try to sell him flowers. She didn't ask him for money. She didn't preach to him about God or redemption. She simply offered him presence. When he finished the water, she took the empty bottle, tucked it into her bag, likely to refill or sell to a recycler later, and patted his arm. It was a maternal gesture, instinctively comforting. Arthur felt a strange stinging behind his eyes, a sensation he hadn't experienced since childhood. He realized he was on the verge of tears, not out of sadness for himself, but out of an overwhelming sense of shame. He thought about his complaints, his cynicism, his opulent isolation. He owned wine bottles that cost more than Lola Rosa would earn in her entire lifetime, yet he had doubted the existence of generosity. As the evening rush hour began, Lola Rosa slowly stood up, her joints audibly creaking. She picked up her basket, turning to Arthur with a toothless, genuine smile that lit up her weathered face. She reached into her pocket again and pulled out a few coins, perhaps 20 pesos, less than 50 cents. She pressed them into Arthur's reluctant palm, closing his fingers over them. He tried to pull back, to refuse, the guilt now almost unbearable. He was a billionaire. He couldn't take this poor woman's last pennies. But she insisted, shaking her head firmly and making a gesture of eating. She was telling him to buy dinner. Before he could protest further, she turned and blended back into the dense crowd of commuters, her small frame disappearing instantly into the sea of humanity, leaving Arthur stunned, holding the most valuable money he had ever possessed. As the evening rush hour began, Lola Rosa slowly stood up, her joints audibly creaking. She picked up her basket, turning to Arthur with a toothless, genuine smile that lit up her weathered face. She reached into her pocket again and pulled out a few coins, perhaps 20 pesos, less than 50 cents. She pressed them into Arthur's reluctant palm, closing his fingers over them. He tried to pull back, to refuse, the guilt now almost unbearable. He was a billionaire. He couldn't take this poor woman's last pennies. But she insisted, shaking her head firmly and making a gesture of eating. She was telling him to buy dinner. Before he could protest further, she turned and blended back into the dense crowd of commuters, her small frame disappearing instantly into the sea of humanity, leaving Arthur stunned, holding the most valuable money he had ever possessed. He knew he couldn't stay on the streets another night. The emotional toll of the day, combined with the physical exhaustion, was too much. He used the last of his original money to flag down a taxi. The driver was reluctant to take such a filthy passenger, but eventually relented when Arthur showed him the cash. The ride back to Makati was surreal. As the landscape shifted from dark, crowded slums to brightly lit avenues lined with luxury car dealerships and five-star hotels, Arthur felt a nauseating sense of whiplash. He walked into the gleaming lobby of his hotel, ignoring the horrified looks of the reception staff until his security chief recognized him and rushed over. Up in his penthouse suite, Arthur stood under a steaming hot shower for an hour, scrubbing the grime of Manila from his skin. But he knew the experience had stained him on the inside in a way that would never wash off. He ordered room service, a steak, fine wine, but when it arrived, he couldn't eat it. The image of Lola Rosa breaking her small piece of bread in half haunted him. Arthur didn't sleep that night. He spent the hours pacing his penthouse, looking out over the sprawling city lights of Manila. Somewhere out there, in the darker parts of the map, Lola Rosa was sleeping on a floor, preparing to wake up before dawn to sell flowers so her grandchildren could eat. The disparity was obscene. He knew he couldn't just fly back to New York and resume his life as if nothing had happened. He owed a debt that money alone couldn't repay, but money was the only tool he had. He needed to find her. The next morning, clean-shaven, wearing a crisp linen shirt and expensive sunglasses, Arthur returned to Quiapo. He was accompanied by his security detail and a local fixer who spoke fluent Tagalog. The environment felt different now. He was an outsider again, observing the poverty from inside a bubble of privilege, but his eyes were seeing different things. Finding Lola Rosa wasn't easy. To the casual observer, the hundreds of elderly street vendors looked similar. But Arthur remembered her eyes, her hunched posture, and the specific spot near the church side entrance where she had approached him. They spent hours showing a quick sketch Arthur had made to other vendors. Finally, an umbrella seller recognized the description. "Ah, Lola Rosa," she confirmed in Tagalog to the fixer. "She lives near the river, by the bridge in Quiapo. She is usually here by now. Maybe she is sick." The news struck Arthur with a cold spike of fear. If she was sick, it was because she had given him her food and water the day before. He demanded the fixer guide them to her home immediately. The journey took them away from the main roads, down narrow, winding alleyways barely wide enough for two people to pass, where sunlight rarely reached the ground. Lola Rosa's home was a barong-barong, a shanty constructed from salvaged plywood, corrugated metal sheets, and tarpaulins, perched precariously on the bank of the polluted Pasig River. The smell of stagnant water and sewage was overwhelming. Arthur's expensive shoes crunched on path made of compacted trash. His security guards looked nervous, hands near their concealed weapons, but Arthur pushed forward. He knocked gently on the piece of plywood that served as a door. It opened slowly, revealing a young girl, maybe 7 years old, looking at them with wide, frightened eyes. Behind her, lying on a thin mat on a dirt floor, was Lola Rosa. She looked smaller than he remembered, her skin pale and clammy in the dim light. She was weak, having succumbed to dehydration and exhaustion in the intense heat of the previous day. When Lola Rosa saw the tall, well-dressed foreigner standing in her doorway, there was zero recognition in her eyes. She looked confused and slightly fearful. Arthur stepped inside, the hovel so small he had to hunch over. He knelt beside her mat, disregarding the dirt on his expensive trousers. "Lola Rosa," he said softly, taking her hand, the same hand that had offered him water. He pointed to himself. Arturo. Yesterday. Quiapo Church. He mimed drinking from a bottle and eating bread. Slowly, awareness dawned in her eyes. Her confusion turned to disbelief. She looked from this clean, wealthy man to her own squalid surroundings, trying to reconcile the filthy beggar she had helped with the titan of industry kneeling before her. She said something weakly in Tagalog. The fixer translated. She asks why you tricked her. She says she thought you were dying. The question pierced Arthur's heart. Tell her I was dying, Arthur told the translator, his voice thick with emotion. Tell her my spirit was dying, and she saved me. He didn't try to explain the complexities of his social experiment. Instead, he went into action mode. He had his security team carry Lola Rosa to their waiting SUV. They drove her immediately to the best private hospital in Manila, ignoring emergency room protocols and demanding she be given the presidential suite. Arthur paid for everything in cash, up front, ensuring she received top-tier medical attention for her dehydration and malnutrition. Over the next 3 days, as Lola Rosa regained her strength in a hospital bed with crisp white sheets and air conditioning, luxuries she had never experienced, Arthur learned her full story through interpreters. Her life had been an unending series of tragedies survived through sheer grit. Her husband had died decades ago in a construction accident. Her only daughter had died of dengue fever 2 years prior, leaving Rosa alone to raise 3 young grandchildren, aged 5, 7, and 9. She woke up at 3 a.m. every morning to buy fresh flowers at the wholesale market, strung them into garlands by hand until sunrise, and then walked the streets until dark, hoping to earn enough to buy rice and dried fish for the children. If she didn't work, they didn't eat. It was that simple. The 20 pesos she had given Arthur was literally money meant for that evening's rice. She had chosen to go hungry that night, so a stranger wouldn't. Hearing this, Arthur felt a reverence for this woman that he had never felt for any world leader or business tycoon. While Lola Rosa recovered, Arthur's team went to work. He wasn't just going to pay her hospital bill and leave. That would be charity. What he wanted was transformation. He bought a modest, safe 3-bedroom house in a quiet province just outside of Manila, far from the pollution and danger of the Quiapo slums, but close enough that she wasn't totally isolated from her community. He set up an irrevocable trust fund that would ensure Lola Rosa never had to work again, and that all 3 of her grandchildren would have their education paid for, from primary school all the way through university. He furnished the house, stocked the pantry, and hired a local case manager to ensure the family settled in smoothly and wasn't taken advantage of. The day Lola Rosa was discharged, Arthur personally drove her to the new house. Her grandchildren were already there, having been collected by the case manager. The reunion was chaotic and tearful. Lola Rosa stood in the living room of the simple, clean house, touching the solid walls, turning on a faucet to see clean running water flow instantly. She looked at Arthur, overwhelmed, unable to process the magnitude of the change. She kept asking, through the interpreter, "Why? Why me? I only gave you bread." Arthur took her hands in his, looking her in the eye. "Lola," he said, "you didn't just give me bread. You gave me back my faith in humanity. You reminded me that we are responsible for each other. That lesson is worth more than all the money in the world." Arthur stayed in the Philippines for another week, ensuring Lola Rosa was settled. He watched as the stress that had etched deep lines into her face began to soften. She wasn't suddenly a different person. She was still the tough, resilient survivor, but the existential terror of daily survival was gone. He saw the grandchildren sleeping peacefully in real beds, no longer coughing from the dust of the slums. Before he left for New York, he sat with Lola Rosa on her new porch. They didn't need an interpreter anymore. They understood each other in shared silence. She made him a cup of instant coffee, and to Arthur, it tasted better than any artisanal brew in Manhattan. She gave him a single sampaguita garland she had made, placing it around his neck like a blessing. Arthur Pendelton returned to his skyscraper in New York, but the man who occupied the corner office was fundamentally changed. The hollow feeling was gone, replaced by a burning sense of purpose. He didn't sell everything and become a monk. He was still a capitalist, but his focus shifted radically. He restructured his vast logistics empire to prioritize humanitarian aid routes. He launched a massive charitable foundation focused not on high-profile galas, but on microfinancing for women like Lola Rosa in developing nations. Small grants that allowed them to start businesses and break the cycle of poverty without relying on handouts. He became an advocate for what he called radical empathy in business. He kept the 20 peso coins Lola Rosa had given him. He had them encased in a small acrylic block that sat on his massive mahogany desk, right next to his computer monitors. Whenever he faced a difficult business decision, whenever he felt the old cynicism creeping back in, or whenever he was tempted to prioritize profit over people, he would look at those coins. They were a reminder of the woman with nothing who gave everything. They were a reminder that the greatest acts of generosity often come from the most unexpected places, and that true wealth isn't about what you hoard in your accounts, but what you are willing to share when you think no one is watching. Years went by. Arthur kept in touch with Lola Rosa's family through the case manager. He received photos of the children graduating grade school, then high school. He saw photos of Lola Rosa looking older, yes, but healthier, plump with good food and rested, smiling surrounded by her thriving grandchildren. She became a beloved elder in her new community, known for her kindness and her incredible story of the beggar, who turned out to be a king. Arthur never visited again. He felt that chapter was closed, and he didn't want his presence to overshadow the new life they were building. But her influence on his life was a daily reality. The story of the billionaire and the flower vendor eventually leaked to the press, though Arthur tried to keep it quiet. It became a viral sensation, a modern-day fable about kindness. People were captivated not just by Arthur's generosity, but by Lola Rosa's initial act. It sparked global conversations about the invisibility of the poor and the untapped capacity for compassion in the human spirit. Arthur used the publicity to further his foundation's work, always deflecting credit back to Rosa. "I was just the wallet," he would say in interviews. "She was the heart." One day, a package arrived on Arthur's desk in New York. It was postmarked from the Philippines. Inside was a framed photograph of Lola Rosa's oldest granddaughter, now a young woman, holding her university diploma. She was the first person in their lineage to graduate college. Tucked behind the photo was a handwritten note in shaky English letters. It read simply, *, Kuya Arturo. We are okay now. Salamat. Lola Rosa. *, Arthur. The man who moved mountains of cargo and negotiated billion-dollar deals, sat in his office and wept openly, the Sampaguita garland she had given him years ago still hanging, dried and fragile, on the wall behind him. Arthur's experiment had started as a cynical attempt to prove the world was selfish. Instead, he found that beneath the crushing weight of poverty, the human spirit's capacity for goodness can survive, and even thrive, in ways that privilege often stifles. He went looking for the worst in people and found the very best in someone the world had discarded. The billionaire went undercover as a poor man, but in the end, he realized that for 42 years, he had been the one who was truly impoverished, and it took a flower vendor in Manila to show him what real richness looked like. We often go through life with our defenses up, believing that everyone has an angle, that kindness is a scarce commodity. We judge people by their shoes, their clothes, their zip codes. Arthur Pendelton's journey teaches us that if we dare to look beyond the surface, if we are willing to be vulnerable and see the humanity in the margins, we might just be surprised by who steps up to help us when we fall. The next time you walk past someone whom society has made invisible, remember Lola Rosa. Remember that the most profound gifts often come in the plainest wrapping, and that sometimes the person you least expect is the only one who sees you clearly.